Okay, welcome tonight to July's General Membership Meeting. Appreciate you coming. The topic tonight is Forms Part 2. Last meeting, how many of you were here last month? Okay, we talked about the new residential rental agreement, and we're not going to spend as much time going over it as we did last month, but we're going to go over it a little bit at the end, so that those that came last month can be back earlier. We are going to go over most of the rest of the forms today, but before we start, a couple of announcements. If anybody needs a notebook, just let me know, and we've got some extra notebooks. We have an event tomorrow. Anybody is welcome to come, and I'll have some flyers up here if you want. We have a bowling day for the apartment association, and it's a couple hours of bowling and some arcade gift cards and pizza and drinks, so kind of a big party that we do in the summer. If anybody wants to come let us know. That's a fun event. The next thing that I wanted to remind you about is every January the UAA does a landlord legal cruise. We have some people that have been on that cruise. They could certainly tell you, I think I've been several times, right? How much fun it is, but it's also 12 hours of basically one-on-one time with an attorney. Kirk Collimore will be there, and he goes all the way through operations and legal and best practices, and it's really a great experience. The landlords that go, in addition to getting the legal experience, the legal training, I think they were 70-something last year, and they spend time together and get to know and develop friendships and relationships and networking that lasts their whole career. So if you're interested in any of those events, feel free to grab one of these flyers. One last thing, speaking of Kirk Collimore, some of you know that we are very active politically in the Apartment Association, and Kirk Collimore has been our chair of government affairs for the last 5-10 years and helped write many of the pieces of legislation that we have passed, helped defend the industry. And so Kirk Collimore Jr. decided this year to run for Senate on the Republican side in the 9th Senate District, which is Sandy, a little sliver of Cottonwood Heights, most of White City. Basically, it's the area that we're in right now. And he won the Republican nomination, and then the Democrat dropped out. So if you do the math, he does have a third-party candidate with the UUP that we don't expect a whole lot of activity out of, but we're not taking anything for granted. But we think that in January, that Kirk Collimore Jr. will be one of the newest state senators, which will be an excellent, excellent thing for our association. If you have any rental properties in Sandy, what we're asking you to do is let us know and say, hey, we'd be willing to let you have a sign, and it's a great frontage or something like that. We're looking for sign locations, and our goal is to put up 1,400 signs in the district. If it's big frontage, sometimes it'll get a 4x8. If it's medium frontage, medium traffic, it'll get a 4x4. And if it's in a residential neighborhood, it'll just get a small sign like this. But anything that you can do, we would appreciate. You're also welcome to contribute to the campaign. It will be, that Senate district is the most expensive to run in the state. The last time that it was competitive 12 years ago, there was over $250,000 spent on that race alone. Fortunately, we don't have as competitive a race this year with the Democrat dropping out, but it'll still cost $50,000 to $100,000. And so if you have some resources that you'd like to contribute, get a hold of me, and I will direct you on how to do that. Okay. I need the paperwork. Let me grab that from the back. Does anybody else need a copy? Okay, so let's start in the blue packet tonight and review some of the other forms, the main forms. I'm actually going to start backwards. I'm going to go to the last page in the packet. The staff tells me that the settlement agreement is one of the forms they get asked about most. One of the things that I want to remind you is that when you have a contract between parties, at any time in that contract, if you want to change the terms unilaterally, meaning just you without their approval, that's not a good idea. So landlords call us all the time and say, I signed a 1-year lease, but I hate this guy. I want him out of here. Can I do something about it? No, not if they're complying with the contract. You signed a contract. You cannot unilaterally change it, but you can bilaterally change it. And so what we tell landlords all the time is if things aren't working, go sit down with your tenant and work something out. If the tenant comes to you and says, I don't like you, I don't like the property, I want to move to Michigan, you can work something out. And so the settlement agreement is for cases where you bilaterally decide to modify a contract. Now, the most common is the tenant wants out of their lease. And I want to remind you of a Supreme Court case of about 14, 15 years ago. It involved lease cancellation fees in the state of Utah. The Supreme Court determined that it is not okay for you to put in your contracts, at the beginning of the contract, a clause that says, in the event that either party, or in this case the tenant, wants to get out of the agreement, they can simply pay X dollars and get out of the agreement. What the Supreme Court determined, and we don't have to like this decision, is that unless that amount was determined by experience and an analysis of the actual cost of a vacancy, that it would be considered what we call liquidated damages and illegal. So, the good news is, if you have done some research and you have said, yeah, when a tenant moves out or breaks the lease, it costs me on average $2,000. If you have documentation of that, then you, yes, can put in your contract that if you want to break the lease, it's $2,000 lease cancellation fee. Okay? The other thing that you can do, which doesn't require homework or research, is address the breach at the time of the breach and not at the beginning of the contract. So if you'll notice, the apartment association contract does not have a place in it that says cancellation fee. If you decide to cancel this lease, it's X dollars. We know that if we have that in there, some of you would put a number in there that you don't have data to back up. Does that make sense? And so we have taken that option of screwing up off the table, and instead we have a settlement agreement, because the Supreme Court said at the time of the breach you can negotiate any dollar amount you like. All right? I used to manage the Palladio Apartments downtown about 17 years ago, right in the downtown area. This is right before the Olympics, and we had people's companies transferring them in and out all the time. And they would come to us and they say, you know what, I just got transferred, I got to move on. And we'd say, no problem. Our policy is it's $3,000 to cancel. They'd say, no problem, my company's going to pay it anyway. The company would pay $3,000 to get out of the lease, and we'd rent it the next day. Okay? Now, is that fraud? No. Is that illegal? No, because why? We bilaterally agreed on a dollar amount. If they had said, no, Paul, we're not going to do that. What we would prefer is we know how hot the market is, and we want you to just try to rent it and then charge us the actual damages, the one-day lost rent, your labor, your marketing costs. And it would have been considerably cheaper in that case. But because they agreed bilaterally, then we can charge a settlement fee. So the settlement agreement form is for you to put anything in there that you'd like to settle. Most of the time, we have a settlement amount. Okay, so we put the agreement dated is between landlord and tenant. In consideration of the covenants and premises herein contained, the parties agree to as follows, and then you have the amount, and then you can amend this if you want. You can, if there's additional terms, you can simply amend it. But basically, it says they're off the hook. Any questions? They tell me I can't move on until you ask one question at least. Paulette.
Can you write up an addendum?
Yes.
Initially?
If you would rather do that than this, absolutely. This is just boilerplate, a way to help you do whatever you want. My counsel is that contracts require two things. They can require consideration, which is what? Money. Money's got to change hands, and then we have to have agreement on both parties. So it requires consideration and agreement. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Lawyers sometimes shudder when I say, you know, if you can just say, in exchange for $5, we agree to the following, it's probably legally binding. It might not be as solid as if an attorney wrote it, but it's probably okay, especially if we're talking about small potato stuff. Now, clearly, if you're buying or selling property, we need tougher, stronger contracts, we need the state-approved forms. But for little things like releasing somebody or adding someone to the lease or something like that, you can generally do that yourself. Okay, all right, starting at the back, let's move our way in. We have a lot of landlords in the modern era who don't know what a move-in, move-out inspection is. And I just want to remind you that it is an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy so that when the tenant moves out and says that damage was already there, you can go back and say, oh no, it wasn't. In fact, according to this, there was new carpet, there was new paint, there was new appliances, and you're responsible to return the premises to the landlord in the same condition that you gave it to them minus what? Minus normal wear and tear. And is dirt wear and tear? No. And so any cleaning is always a damage. Okay? So remember, if they leave it dirty or you got to clean the carpets, or you can always deal with that and charge them for it. But this is a great thing. Now, some tenants want to put all of a little hole here, a little hole here. They want to be ticky-tacking. All power to them. Okay? Particularly if you address any of those things, because then you can reference this. You can say, hey, remember when you moved in, you mentioned that there were these problems. Here's a letter that we have fixed those. You can add that to your file, and you have evidence that you have taken care of those issues. Any questions on the move-in, move-out report? Jolene.
Would it be better also to take pictures before they move in, so you've got documents?
So there's really no excuse in our digital age not to take pictures. Some people prefer writing, and that's fine. But we have a camcorder filming this tonight. It's really easy to have either a camcorder or use your phone and video the premises on the day they move in. It's also easy to take pictures. Whatever you choose is probably all legally admissible. Now, I want to just remind you that judges typically don't spend a lot of time watching your videos or looking at your pictures. That's not the point of documenting. The point of documenting is to what? Keep the other side honest. Okay? And so don't plan on big presentations or PowerPoints or anything like that with your pictures. Don't spend a lot of time. Those really are just to keep the other side honest. And so if in the process, prior to litigation, they say, well, wait a second, there was a problem there, you can pull out the picture and say, this jog your memory? Right?
And with carpeting and stuff like that,
Yeah.
If tenant moves out and you deem necessary to clean carpets, I in the past have taken that from out of the deposit. Is that proper?
So the question is, if there is dirty carpets and I decide to clean them, can I deduct that from the deposit? And what did we say earlier? All cleanliness issues are damages, and so they can certainly be deducted from the security deposit.
If the carpeting, after cleaning, fell apart
Yeah.
or come apart, now it has to be replaced. What's the situation?
Okay, the question is,
So,
the cleaning itself causes the carpet to deteriorate or to fall apart. It could be that that is an installation problem. It could be that that is a carpet cleaner operator error problem. So I don't think in every case that we can charge that to the tenant. So just be mindful and look at it on a case-by-case basis.
okay. Good enough.
Now, one thing I will remind you is, and it's really cool, that the modern tenant prefers hard surface floors in most areas except bedrooms. And so when you're replacing carpets, we really encourage you to look at things like hardwoods or the laminates or the laminates that look like hardwoods or there's all sorts of different products. Some people use tile. It's really easy in most cases, if there's tile, to cut one out and repair a broken one. It's really easy in many cases if it's a hard surface and it's the kind that's snapped together, something like that, to replace a section and not the whole thing. It's much harder if there's carpet that's damaged to not replace the whole room. There's ways to dye and to cut out and patch and things like that. But the modern tenant actually prefers hardwoods, and they buy their own rugs. And so that's a recommendation, is when you replace carpet, carpet is one of the things landlords spend the most money on. Consider other alternatives. Yes?
And it's also a lot easier to clean if they have to
Stays cleaner.
be taken care of. Somebody's
I agree.
pet For a little while.
I agree, it's a lot easier to clean and restore quicker. Joey?
Isn't it, I know like on hardware, if they damage it, you just can't replace one board, you have to replace like a fourth of the section, which can add up. But if they scratch the hardwood, moving their furniture around, can we charge them for that or what? Because that becomes.
Sure, any damage they do, the question is if the hardwood is scratched or damaged, can you charge them for it? Of course you can. So these are things that we probably could do a whole class on flooring, and I'm sure
That's
we
not
will
considered
one
normal
night.
wear or tear.
A light scratching from use could be considered normal wear and tear. Deep scratching from moving the piano would not be considered normal wear and tear. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Yes.
Okay, I'm really new at this.
That's great. We love new.
On these walkthroughs, do we walk through with them?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the recommendation, the question is, who does the walkthrough? Most landlords either fill it out and have the tenant, hey, walk around and make sure I got everything on this, that I did it right, and then they sign it. So that's option one, probably the preference. Okay. Option two is that you do it at the same time. Problem is, it already takes a lot of time to sign the lease and to move in, and sometimes it just makes your move-in process longer. But that's a legitimate option. Third option is you're in a hurry, right? And so what do? You say, fill it out and mail it to me.
Yeah.
Okay? And what does it usually have on it if it's super ticky-tack and you can't go back and verify and that kind of stuff. But in our lease, we have the 48-hour acceptance clause. It basically says, tenant, you have 48 hours. If you see anything wrong, you can just write us a letter, send us a text, and we'll amend this. So that's why I recommend either doing it in advance and handing it to them to approve, or doing it with them. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you were running late or if you forgot about it. I'd much rather you actually at least did one than didn't do one. Okay, next one, the security deposit accounting. I want to remind you, 4 years ago, we had a great opportunity. We had some tenants groups that didn't like the deposit law and felt like bad landlords got off too easy if they didn't return deposits on time. So we said, we're going to save the day and we're going to increase the penalties on bad landlords. But what that really was cover for us to go in and create a opportunity to cure for you. Most litigation and deposits occurred because the tenant never received anything, and they never received anything because they never gave us a forwarding address. And so what we did is we said, the law is still 30 days from when they move out. We're going to talk about 30 days from when in just a second, but 30 days from when they move out, they need to, you need to send a disposition of the deposit. So that could be one of three things. That could be, congratulations, your deposit was $1,000, you get the whole thing back, have a nice life. It could be, congratulations, your deposit was $1,000, there was only $500 of damages itemized below. Here's $500, have a nice life. Or it could be, unfortunately, your deposit was only $1,000, your charges were $3,000, so you owe us $2,000. Please pay that amount immediately or we will vigorously pursue collection, including that if you don't settle with us or work something out, we have to hire a collection agent or a collection attorney. We can add what percent of the amount owed? 40%. And where is that? Is that in statute or contract? It's in our contract. According to the contract, we can add 40% to the cost. So if it's $2,000 and we send it to the collection attorney, they immediately add $800 in collection costs that are contractual and probably another $800 in attorney's fees, which are allowed. So almost doubles if they don't work something out with you. So I don't like to surprise people. I want to tell tenants, listen, if you don't work something out with me, it's going to be really bad for you. And so let's try to work something out. Where is the 40% in the contract? It's in the general clause or the miscellaneous clause. I can't remember. It's one of those two. And I'll review that when we get to the contract in a few minutes. Yes?
What is the typical amount of the security deposit as a percentage of the rent?
Yeah, the question is, what is the typical amount of a security deposit based on a percentage of rent? What I like to do is ask the group, okay, how many of you charge between 0 and 50% of 1 month's rent as your deposit? Not very many hands. How many 50 to 100% of 1 month's rent is a deposit? Looks like about half of the hands. How many try to get at least 100% or more of a month's rent as your deposit? Okay, that's almost about 50%. So if that gives you a feel, now remember we're in markets, so we don't as an association set or encourage you to set your prices or your deposits or your fees at a particular level, but what we encourage you to do is to recognize what the market does. And my guess is, if you're in a South Salt Lake or a West Valley where there's lots of rentals and you've got a fourplex on the street where there's 10 other fourplexes, that you're not going to get as high of a deposit as you want because you're going to have to compete with the other guys that are going to have, my guess is about 75% of 1 month's rent as their average deposit. If you're renting a single-family home in an area where there's not a lot of competition, not a lot of other single-family homes, yours is unique or something like that, you can probably get 150, 200% of 1 month's rent as your deposit without blinking. So there's a little bit of set it, and if you're not renting, there's a problem. Either your place isn't nice enough, your rent is too high, or another term like your deposit is off. Okay? All right, so security deposit accounting. The law says 30 days. But then the tenant has to serve you a notice that says, hey, you didn't get me the deposit within 30 days. This is your 5-day opportunity to cure. Okay? This is my address. This is how you can contact me. Within 5 days, you're now obligated to contact me. And if you don't, there's extra penalties that kick in. For instance, they will get a $100 statutory award for kind of punitive damages. They will get attorney's fees and court costs. And most likely, they will get the full deposit as damages. Okay? Now, I'm not worried about this law at all because good landlords respond when their tenants give them a 5-day notice. Better landlords already sent it out within the 30 days. But somebody asked me last night when we did this meeting down in Provo, well, what if I just change my policy and I never send deposits out now until tenants ask for them? Well, I don't think that that's a best practice, but would there be any penalty on anybody if they did that? There would not. The law says no penalty until the tenant has served you the 5-day notice and you ignore it. All right, any questions? Yes?
If they don't give you a forwarding address, I was told to send it to the same address that they just left.
That's right.
And if it's not forwarded, I have evidence.
That's right. The observation is if somebody does not give a forwarding address, best practice is to mail it to the last known address. And if that ends up showing up in your mailbox, then you have evidence. But you can also document and say, on the 7th, I mailed it to the last known address. It's still a best practice, but at this point it doesn't matter because the only thing that matters is the tenant cannot sue you until what? They give you an opportunity to cure. Okay? And so I love that deposit lawsuits have almost gone to zero. I mean, sometimes people still disagree, but lawsuits, because they didn't get something, it just aren't happening anymore. Okay? Jolene?
When a tenant gives me a 30-day notice, I always tell them, don't put your forwarding address down, otherwise the check goes to where you live and
That's
comes
right.
back.
That's right. When you're dealing with them, when you're interacting, encourage them to the best of your ability to give you a forwarding address. Yes?
I know one thing that I do almost religiously right from the inspections on down is I let them know right up front that I'm not in the business of making money on repairs, all of this type of thing. I want to give you 100% of your deposit back, all right? And right off the bat, I'll tell you, it softens things.
I like that.
People love it, and they say, wow, this guy, I'll even say, because it's true this year, I only think I had one person out of quite a few that didn't get 100% of their security deposit back.
The observation is, tell your tenants that you want to give 100% back because that means you didn't have to have extra time wasted or anything like that. Your life's a lot easier if you give them 100% back. Okay? Any questions on security deposit accounting? All right.
So you could kind of rule out that once you could give the deposit back imperfectly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. The question is, the tenant insists that they meet you face-to-face to get the deposit back. You don't have to do that, but I think if you can accommodate them, that's okay, and that's a good idea. Obviously, I wouldn't do that to somebody who's confrontative or is a little bit of a hothead if they're going to get, not their whole deposit back and it's going to be a big problem or something like that. So consider your safety, but there's absolutely no problem meeting them in person to hand them a check. Yes?
I still request, even under that situation, I have had that happen, where the tenant wanted to meet me. I said, bring your forwarding address.
Right. You still want it for your file, the
I'll
forwarding
give you,
address.
I'll
Okay, so
give you-
here's
I'll
a couple.
give you the accounting, I'll give you the accounting and your check,
Great.
but I still need your forwarding address.
So here's a couple of what I call property management 201 questions, okay, for this subject. Here's the question. There are two people on the lease who aren't getting along. One of you calls up and says, I want you to write the deposit and return it just to me. How do you handle that? What do we always, we put two names on a check in that case, or if there are 4 tenants, we put all 4 names on the check and we let them work that out, okay? Never take a side. Use the same names on the check refund that are on the lease and you'll protect yourself. Jolene?
Be sure and use the word "and" when you put it, because I actually had it where I just put a comma, and just one tenant cashed it, and the others come back to me and say, hey, it was cashed by your roommate, go get it from me.
Okay, the observation is that in her experience, she would rather write a check to 3 people with an "and" between them so that the bank is clear that all 3 signatures are required rather than a comma between them. She had an experience where a bank allowed just one person with a comma between them. The good news is, if all of the names were on the check, it's not your liability, it's the bank's liability. Just make sure all of the names are on the check, and using the words "and" between them is just a bonus and helpful. Okay. On the next page, we have a medical request for an assistance animal. And you can't ever go to an apartment association meeting and not talk about fair housing. I can never go anywhere without being asked about assistance animals. And so we're just going to review this form really fast. This is the form that a doctor or a healthcare professional signs that attests that a tenant is handicapped and that the animal they're requesting is a medical necessity. It's not enough that they want an animal. It's not enough that they would be happier with an animal. There's a lot of us that are happier with animals. Some of us aren't happy with animals, but some of us, animals make happy, but it doesn't mean we need it. Doesn't mean our landlord has to require it and waive pet fees and pet rents and things like that. In order to receive a waiver of pet fees and pet rents and pet policies and pet bans, it has to be an assistance animal. So this is a doctor's form. Now, how many of you know what you're supposed to do when you get this form back? What do you do, Paulette?
You send it directly to the doctor.
Well, that is probably a good idea to make sure it comes directly from the doctor. But whether it comes directly from the doctor or not, what do we tell you to do with this form as soon as you get it back? Yes, we pick up the phone, and there's 3 questions that we ask the doctor. 1, doctor, did you sign this? Why do we ask the doctor to verify they signed it? Because oftentimes somebody in their office will fraudulently sign it on the doctor's behalf, and they probably will get fired for that. Okay? We have cases all the time where something doesn't pass the smell test. I remember one that the note for a 45-year-old woman was on Mountain View Pediatrics letterhead. Okay? Well, wait a second. Pediatric doctors treat children. Why do we have a 45? So the sister worked in that office. Okay? And so there really was no relationship with the doctor. There was just, will you sign my sister's note? Okay? And that is the kind of thing that we don't have to allow, because there's not a legitimate doctor-patient relationship involved there. So first question, did you or did you not sign it? Another example is probably a really nice guy. Obviously he was trying to help his friends out or something. He was a PA at the university. And PAs, if you remember, are supervised by a doctor. They can do a lot of stuff, but it's under the supervision of a doctor. And they signed this and called, and the PA said, yeah, I signed it. Well, okay, we want to talk to the doctor. Well, he's not here. Well, we're not proving it until we talk to the doctor. And we'd never have the doctor call us back. Finally, we caught the doctor, and we said, doctor, did you know your PA signed this? No, he didn't have authority to sign this. Only I think he lost his job, or had to move firms or something like that. Are we trying to get doctors fired? No. What we're trying to do is prevent fraud. Okay? There is too much fraud in assistance animals, and part of it is our fault. Okay? Some of you have too restrictive pet policies or too high pet fees, pet rents, things like that. We find that there's a sweet spot where a tenant that has an animal comes and says, I'd like the animal, and you say, okay, it's a $200, $300 pet deposit, $200 non-refundable fee, and $50 extra a month. And they say, okay, I can afford that. Okay? But if you say no, absolutely no way, their mind is going to start, how can I get around this? How can I get an animal anyway? So sometimes pet bans really just convert the animal to an assistance animal, and you have to deal with it anyway without an extra deposit, without monthly compensation. So be a little bit cognizant that sometimes you bring this on yourselves by your unreasonableness in the first place. Okay? All right, Paula.
What about, I'm finding a lot, they don't call them assistance animals, they call them emotional support.
Yeah. Okay.
Are those synonymous?
Aren't they?
So I'm going to go through a vocabulary list right now, okay? The Americans with Disability Act in 1991 and the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988 referred to what we call a service animal. A service animal is an animal that actually acts as a tool, like a seeing eye dog or an epileptic seizure dog or a low blood sugar dog or an audio dog. I love these things, that they jump and spin to the right if it's the doorbell, they jump and spin to the left if it's the telephone. Great, what a neat thing that those animals can help someone and can act as a tool. I don't believe that in 1991, 1998 that anyone anticipated that it's something like 99% of the animals that are requested are not service animals. They're mostly what we classify as assistance animals, which some people use synonymous names like emotional support animal, comfort animal, companion animal, therapy animal, okay? Rather than quibble over vocabulary, what I would like you to do is call any request for an animal an assistive animal, even if it's a service animal or an emotional support animal or a companion animal or whatever it is, and just refer to it as an assistance animal. Now, HUD, the term they prefer is emotional support animal. Well, that's okay. They can use that word. We're as an industry going to say assistance animal. Okay? Yes?
How many limits? I have 4 cats, 1 dog. No assistant.
Okay. So remember what this form does, it says doctor. Are they handicapped? Well, what's the definition of handicap? Well, it's right here. Let's read it. A physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities. A record of such or being regarded as having such an impairment. So you have to actually qualify as handicapped to even get an animal. Okay?
Companion doesn't need to be handicapped.
Yes, it does. Okay? So let's remind you that the law that we're talking about has a definition called handicap. Now, the modern tenant advocate wants you to call a disabled person, or a person with a disability is actually the term they like you to use. Okay? I would still say handicap. Why? Because that's a statute that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with interpretation of language, and then in dealing with interpretation of language, we try to go back to the original written word, which is handicap. Okay? So the definition of handicap is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of such or being regarded as such, and to request any type of assistance animal, you must qualify as handicapped. Everybody understand that? And a doctor must affirm that you are. Okay, second, the doctor must also say not only are they handicapped, but the animal is a medical necessity. So let's say I'm in a wheelchair. Does that mean I get an animal? Not necessarily. The animal can't help me walk. Okay? Well, I also have low blood sugar and I need the animal as a diabetes. Okay. Now we're getting close because it's a medical necessity and serves a specific purpose. Okay, so if I have one companion animal or what, an assistance animal or service animal, whatever we're gonna call it. Let's call his name Fluffy. And Fluffy's a low name. Can an assistance animal or a comfort animal get an assistance animal or a comfort animal? A companion animal, if you will? No, the law's for people, not animals. Okay?
But a deaf, blind,
Okay, so here is her workaround. I'm blind, I get a dog for that. I'm deaf, I get a dog for that. I'm low blood sugar, I get a dog for that. Okay, maybe. Okay? But the doctor would have to verify that this dog does this for them, this dog does this for them, and this dog does this for them. So when somebody says, I have 4 cats and a dog and they're all assistance animals, we better have one doctor that says what they all do. Sometimes what tenants do is they have 3 doctors for 3 different animals. And that's not okay. When you call Dr. A and say, did you know they have 2 others? Well, I didn't know that. Would you have approved yours if you'd known about the other 2? No. Okay? So it's got to be typically the same doctor, except in cases like where there's specialties involved. Like, okay, if they're blind, you can have the vision doctor. If it's an emotional, maybe the emotional doctor. Okay. But in most cases, one doctor can diagnose and affirm all of them. Jolene.
Is it just dogs and cats, or is it any?
Okay, so the service animal rule, service animals under federal law can only be 2 types of animals. What are they? Okay, there are nerds in this room that know this answer. Okay, I know you're out there. Don't be bashful. Don't be bashful. One is a dog. The second one is a
Horse.
yes, a miniature horse. Because when the statute was written, the in vogue, up and coming thing was we were training small, and just so you understand, we're not talking about, Black Beauty. We're talking about a 50-pound maybe animal. And how long does that animal live versus a dog? Dog lives 10, 12 years. Miniature horses live 75 years. So honestly, if would you rather have 6 seeing eye dogs in your life or 1 miniature horse? They haven't really caught on. Right here.
I had recently a situation where an emotional attendant came to me and wanted to get, she wanted to get a cat because her doctor had told her that it would help her emotionally.
Okay.
And I just don't want it. I don't want a cat.
Okay.
So I asked her, I said, would a fish do you? She got a fish and she's happy as a lark.
All right, so this gentleman made a suggestion, and I'm going to call it by the name that we in the industry use. It's what we call the interactive dialogue. A tenant asked for an animal, it was a dog, and he said, well, would a fish work? And the tenant said, sure, and it's been wonderful ever since.
Yeah.
It is a perfectly appropriate technique to not argue with them, but have an interactive dialogue about, I'm not sure I like that. How about this option? How about this option? And so it's okay to have an interactive dialogue.
Every time I happen to run onto her, she wants me to come and see her fish.
Great. Now, if the tenant disagrees with you and says, no, I still want an animal, you still have to go through the verification process. Now, I still need to follow up and answer Jolene's question. What kind of animal is appropriate for a non-service animal? Can I ask for a snake? Yes. Can I ask for a lizard? Sure. Can I ask for a fish? Any animal, okay, can be an assistance animal, an emotional support animal, a comfort animal. And guys, you're just going to have to take a deep breath and relax, okay? Most of your biggest fears and your hypotheticals never happen anyway. Stop it. You're being silly. You're overanalyzing. You're losing sleep over silliness. But if somebody does ask for a snake, what rules should I have in place to govern how that animal is taken care of?
That must be kept in the cage, I heard you.
What are we going to call the rules? Well, house rules deal with non-animal issues. What I'm specifically looking for is animal rules, okay? And even if you don't allow pets, you should have animal rules. And a typical animal rule is, can't bite the mailman, you got to clean after it, it can't damage the property, it can't interfere with the peaceful enjoyment of others. So we could still have a rule that you gotta clean up after the snake, you can't let it out, you can't make babies in the vents or whatever. Okay. Jolene?
I was watching a program about 4 or 5 years ago. Someone had a service deli. It was a snake.
Okay.
I think it was a python.
Okay.
The snake got out
Okay.
and went into one of the other apartments and actually strangled and killed the baby. So, I mean, how do we...
All right, so what she is asking is, she heard one time somewhere that an assistance animal escaped and killed somebody. Okay, interesting. It's not going to change what we do. You have insurance to cover gross negligence on your part, but would that have even been your issue? No, that's not your issue. Okay, that's a terrible tragedy. But again, landlords worry about things they just can't control. Stop it.
This is the most detailed discussion that I've heard on this subject.
Okay?
What's been the result? Are we being treated more fairly now?
The question is our new policy of doing a verification reducing fraud or getting us treated more fairly? I think it's reducing fraud, and I think that groups that want to sue us are having a hard time because if you don't know this, these forms were actually, I have to be careful in how I say this, they were part of a settlement with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and the settlement said that these forms, we revised them, they didn't like the old forms, so we revised them, and these forms now comply with federal fair housing law. And so most of the HUD districts in the country now have recognized that if a landlord followed this process, it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card. Okay? So the answer is, yes, Rich, this has helped us not be taken advantage of or sued or nitpicked. Do tenants still try to get assistance animals when they don't deserve them? Of course they do. And I predict it'll just get worse and worse and worse because people just talk. And somebody else, oh, I heard this great way to get a, probably shouldn't say this, but a state official who's in a position of enforcing this was in a meeting recently, and she said, my sister thinks she needs an assistance animal at her apartment. She doesn't. It's totally cheating, and her landlord caved in and gave it to her. But it's a huge problem. People are going to continue to do it. So all you can do is what you can do, and that's verify. Okay, I need to move on. So the medical request is the third form in the assistance animal packet. The second form in the assistance animal packet is the animal identification form. Why do we want to identify the animal? So they can't interchange. A little Chihuahua can't turn into a Rottweiler. You have a question, Martha.
You said there were 3 things that we should do. One is to call the doctor.
Oh, thank you for making me go back. Okay, back. 3 things that we do to verify this. We ask the doctor, 1, did you sign it? Number 2, are they handicapped? Number 3, is the animal a medical necessity? Okay? Those are the 3 questions, and we ask it and not in a trying to talk them out of it, not in a berating them or being critical. And then at the end we say, doctor, thank you so much. Just so you know, landlords in Utah are being taught that any time a doctor signs one of these forms, we're to call and verify. So expect that any time in the future that you sign one of these forms, you'll receive a verification call. Now what are we trying to do? We're trying to educate the doctor because sometimes doctors are taken advantage of. And you'll call them up and say, is the person handicapped? And they'll say, well, all they said to me was they needed this note signed to get a dog. Well, doctor, that's not true because we allow animals. We just have fees and deposits if it's not an assistance animal. And they didn't want to pay the fees or deposits. Are they handicapped? And the doctor may say, they're really not. So if they can have it, they can pay the fee. Sometimes the doctors dig in and say, yeah, I signed this, I need to defend it, I need to, yeah. But maybe the next time, they'll be more careful. Okay? Thank you for making us go back.
So can you get this before you okay?
All right, this is a great question. A tenant applies, and you've got 10 tenants that want the place. Okay? This tenant that applies also, at the same time that they apply, make an accommodation request for an assistance animal. Okay, this is really easy. Some of you maybe didn't think of this yet. But those are two requests, and they're not related. What do I mean? I mean, the first thing they said is, I think I qualify for a rental, so I'm putting a deposit down and I'm going to have you check my background. And your answer is either going to be what? Yes, you qualify, or no, you don't. Okay, on the side, they also said, I would also like, if I'm approved, an assistance animal. Okay? And that is a separate request, and you may not be able to verify that as quickly as you can the rest, correct? Mm-hmm. So here's what happens if you verified one but not the other. You say, dear Paul, you're approved. And our policy when someone is approved, because we have so many other people that want the place, is you have to sign a contract within 24 hours. Would you like to sign a contract? And they say, well, what about the assistance animal? And you say, that is still pending. If you sign the contract and it's approved, then you can move the animal in when it's approved. But until it's approved, you can't move the animal in. So just so you know, you can sign the contract, but you couldn't move the animal in yet. Isn't that much more professional, much fair, and a lot easier than saying, oh my gosh, I can't even run a background check on this person because the assistance animal is going to take 3 weeks, and I don't want to wait 3 weeks to give them an answer. Don't wait 3 weeks to give them an answer. Give them an answer within 24 hours on question 1, do they qualify? And say, hey, if you want to be approved faster on the assistance animal, what should they do? Go to the doctor's office and say, here's my cell phone, call my landlord. Okay?
Is that a law says you have to sign it by a doctor? Can any nurse, other people can sign those?
Okay. Under Fair Housing and Americans with Disability Act, the rule is the person signing has to be in a position to attest that they really have a disability and that they really need the animal. So there are cases where a mother could sign. For instance, if an autistic child, she raised him and she knows his issues, and yeah, she can probably say, yeah, he's autistic and he needs this animal. Okay? But most of the time, it needs to be a doctor. So I, again, caution you, don't panic. Don't, oh my gosh, there's so many loopholes, it's like Swiss cheese. Okay, just take a deep breath and say, we need it to be a doctor to, the form says doctor, and 99% of the time, it is a doctor. If occasionally somebody comes back to you and says, my sister signed it, what training does your sister have in disabilities or medical? I don't think we're going to accept that. We really prefer a doctor. So just real quickly, there's 3 answers we can give someone that asks an assistance animal. Number 1 is, yes, we approve it. Sign the assistance animal rules that you verify you're going to follow them and you're in. Okay? 2, no, you're not handicapped. It's not a medical necessity. Fluffy doesn't get a companion animal. Okay? And the 3rd is pending. What does that mean? It means I don't have enough information yet. Okay? Your sister's not enough. I'm not saying no, but I'm saying I need probably a doctor. Or the doctor's note's not enough. It's good, but I also need the doctor to return my call. Okay.
Well, don't you also need a certificate on what the animal is trained for?
No, you don't. So this is one of the things. Certificates of training are only relevant for what type of animal? A service animal, which is 1% of the requests that we receive. Okay. Jillian.
Do nurse practitioners count?
Well, a nurse practitioner is supervised by a doctor, so the doctor should sign it. Yes.
And what you suggested about avoiding this by making the rules regarding pets maybe a little easier for tenants to deal with?
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations about what requirements you would make of someone having an animal that they find are fair and might avoid some of this?
So the question is, do we have some type of resource or guide to help you establish reasonable pet rules that won't make people run for the service animal forms or the assistance animal forms, right? And the answer is no, but it's probably a good idea. I'll look into creating some. Yeah.
For those who only have one rental unit.
Okay, now let's go back. If you only have one rental unit, you're not even covered by fair housing. When are you covered by fair housing? 4th rental property. when you have 4 or more, okay? Now, I think fair housing is pretty good best practices, but if I just had a basement apartment and I didn't want dogs down there, I could legally say no. And if they file a complaint, the Anti-Discrimination Division comes and says, we're investigating this complaint, all you say is, I'm exempt from fair housing because I only have 1 rental unit, and they say, see you later. Okay? So, 4 or more is the threshold, yes.
I have two young kids working at IRUP laboratory.
Okay.
And they said because the work intensive, they're not mentally impaired or anything. They feel totally capable of working in the lab, but their critic says because of the intensive working environment, they needed some type of companion after work.
Right.
So each of them gets signed.
Right, and so the question is, he has 2 tenants that say the stress level of their job necessitates needing an animal. They're not disabled or handicapped, but they need an animal. Well, this is what I'm talking about. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a policy in place that says, listen, I want to help you. And so it's only going to be $50 extra per pet per month, which is reasonable, let's be honest. Okay? 1 massage a month costs more than that, right? So $50, and then just to be fair, I'm going to add a couple $100 extra deposit because that just seems reasonable. An animal could do extra damage, and so that shouldn't be considered as mean. And then I might even have a non-refundable fee. My favorite new fee is the chip fee, or the DNA fee. You know, when you have an animal, you can require a DNA sample. They come in and you get one of these mail-in kits, and the owner, not you, swabs the inside of the animal's, don't put your hand inside a pit bull's mouth, okay? The owner swabs the inside of the mouth, you send it off, and then if there's ever little doggy bombs on the lawn that nobody claims, we can send that to the lab and identify whose animal violated the rules and charge I know people that charge a $200 fine for not cleaning up after your animal if we have to send it to the lab and identify it. Okay? All right. So my point is, rather than fight with them and say you're not disabled, you don't need it, you don't get it, find a way to accommodate them. Say, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but boy, it's cheaper than therapy or massages all the time. Yeah.
I got a little bit lost on the fair housing limit of 4.
Okay. The federal fair housing law that was passed in 1968, somebody said the 2 things you never want to see made are sausage and legislation. You just want to see the end product. In the process of creating that law, my understanding is, in order to get votes from the Southern Democrats, they had to put the exemption so that their mothers wouldn't be mad at them. Okay, the mother that had 1 unit or their neighbor that had 1 unit. They basically said, we don't mind sticking it to the professionals, but we're not going to harm our constituents, our voters, that have less than 3 units. So that was the compromise. And ever since then, the Federal Fair Housing Act has contained an exemption if you have less than 4 rental homes. Unless it's your primary business, or unless you have a professional license like real estate appraisal mortgage.
Does that mean 4 separate residential units or
4 rental units or less. In fact, there's what's called the Mrs. Murphy exemption. You could own a 4-plex and live in 1 unit and just rent 3 and you're still exempt from fair housing.
4 or less, is it nationwide or state?
This is a federal nationwide rule. So if I own 2 units in Arizona and 1 unit in Puerto Rico, I'm good. But if I buy 1 in Utah, that's 4 and I'm covered by fair housing. Okay. All right. Okay. So this next form is the animal identification form. Just use it. The first form is the one the tenant fills out. And this is where they say, yes, I'm handicapped, and yes, I promise I need the animal. It's a medical necessity. Okay? So all 3 of these forms are important. Now, let me just remind you or let you know, if they don't want to fill out these forms, that's okay. These forms are guidance. You can still get something similar from them and still make the call to the doctor, and that's okay. You can't say, well, your forms aren't good enough. You can say, well, they're a start, but I also need this, and I need that, and I need to call the doctor, so on and so forth. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right. The instructions are on page 10. By the way, don't hand these instructions out to the tenant. The instructions are for you. Okay? And then only the 3 forms are included for the tenant. Okay. Declaration of abandoned premises. On page 9. Isn't this fun going backwards? Are you like me? Just want to rebel once in a while and do things backwards? Okay. We passed the law last year that basically said that in the past we used this and it was assumed that a premises was abandoned, but we've strengthened the law and now it's expressed that if we use this, abandonment has occurred and we cannot be sued. What is premises abandonment? There's 1-day premises abandonment and there's 15-day premises abandonment. Who wants to earn some extra credit by telling us what one of those is? You know, it's okay. Go ahead.
1-day abandonment is when they leave the premises for even 1 day and abandon it and they have not paid.
But what element needs to exist in 1 day that you didn't mention? Yes, they removed all their items. Okay, so if on the first or the second day of the month, you go over and you notice the blinds are up and it's empty, and you go, hello, landlord, and you go in there and wait a second, nobody ever told me they were moving. Premises abandonment exists if their items have been removed and rent is past due 1 day. So that's absolutely correct. That's 1-day premises abandonment. What's 15-day premises abandonment? Jolene?
You haven't seen them for 15 days?
There's no reasonable evidence that they've been living there, and their items remain in the apartment, and rent is 15 days past due. Okay? So that's the case where we probably serve this and say, hey, if you don't get a hold of us in 24 hours, we're going to assume the premises is abandoned, we're going to change the locks and move the stuff to storage, and you're now the law is much more in your favor. In the past, a judge could kind of say, I don't think you did that right. But now, if you follow the process, judge has no discretion to find against you because we call it a safe harbor. Okay? What I like is opportunity to cure and safe harbors. And that's what we're fighting for not just landlords, but tenants. Because we don't want there to be misunderstandings. If you followed your rules, you should be protected and safe. Yes?
So it's 15 days after the day that they didn't pay rent? Or
Okay.
15 days after they have abandoned the
It is
property?
15 days rent past due.
Okay.
So rent's due on the 1st and it's the 16th and there's still stuff in there. And the mail is all piled up and the newspapers are piled up and the milk in the fridge when you did the inspection is rotting. It is pretty obvious they're not living there and you can serve this notice.
So if I've already done this and posted this,
Yes.
can I throw all their stuff away?
Okay, now remember the law on abandonment is still 15 days
Okay.
from when you take possession. You have to send them a letter to the last known address. You have to post it on the door. How long do you post it on the door?
2 weeks?
I don't care, but it doesn't have to be very long. You certainly wouldn't leave it overnight, right? Dear neighbors, this place is empty and full of